Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. And we have been working our way through The Mind at Ease by Traleg Rinpoche. Tonight, we're going to go through a couple more chapters. Well, the end of one chapter and then be part of another. And actually, I'm leading off tonight. We decided we were doing the end of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2 tonight, and we decided to reverse the order, Michael and I. We felt it was more appropriate to do that, and perhaps you'll agree as we go along. Michael, do you have the clip that you can share?
We'll see what happens.
Okay. This is from a 1973 movie with Bruce Lee called Enter the Dragon.
Is it there?
Yep.
I don't know what happens if I expand the video. Let me try. It's okay?
That's better.
Okay.
Kick me. Kick me. What was that? An exhibition? We need emotional content. Try again.
We lost the sound, Michael.
Try again. With me. Oh, that's it. How did it feel to you? Let me think. Don't think. Feel. It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory. You understand? Never take your eyes off your opponent, even when you bow. That's it.
He's my miracle child.
And
Miracle child get cancer.
oops, still got some movie going. Michael and I thought that appropriate. That's from a 1973 film that was just beloved by Trungpa Rinpoche's students. That was Bruce Lee, the famous martial arts artist, in a movie called Enter the Dragon. And we thought it appropriate for the line at the end when he points up to the moon, and then he says to the young student, never take your eye, don't look at the finger, or you will miss all the heavenly glory. In other words, don't look at what's pointing, look at what it's pointing to. And that really is the theme of this chapter. And we thought it was a kind of a humorous way to introduce it. I hope you agree. Maybe we'll hear from you in the Q&A. In any event, what this chapter is about is entitled The Importance of Correct View. And it starts out by talking about how Buddhism has always adapted and changed its message according to the people, the countries, the times, the circumstances, the culture, as it's moved around the world. I mean, prior to the communist Chinese invasion, takeover of China, not invasion, but takeover, in 1949, and their outlawing of Buddhism and all religions at that point, Buddhism at that time was the most populous religion in the world. And it had moved all over the place. It had moved from India, starting, starting around in the 3rd century AD to Ceylon, around the time of Christ. It went to China. Around the 7th century, it went from China to Japan and also to Korea. And at about the same time, it went around the 7th century AD from India to Tibet and throughout Central Asia. In each place, it adapted to the culture, not only the language, and of course, when it made the transition to China, much less Japan, the culture, the linguistic shift was enormous, and it took about 400 years for the Chinese to figure it out and start getting the doctrine right in their own inimitable style, influenced by Taoism and their culture. But the Chinese language was so difficult, so different from Sanskrit and Pali that it constituted some very big hurdles for Buddhism to achieve. Wherever it has gone, it has adapted to the language, the culture, the times, the people, bringing its message. This is the whole idea of relative truth. The absolute truth in Buddhism is beyond words. It's simply what is experienced in the moment, right now, and words are an add-on. In fact, the word for word, concept in Tibetan is dakpa, and it means literally label. It's as though a word is a label that you affix to an experience or a thing. So for instance, if you're sitting in front of a table, the word table, it's as though you would write it on a tag and Scotch tape it to the table. The table is hugely various in its experience, in your experience of it. You have the shape, the color, and the way the light is striking it, the feeling of it as you touch it, whatever it may be. But the word table is just table. And that is the relationship of concept to reality, or of concept to experience. And so concept becomes what is called in Buddhism relative truth. It is relatively true in a particular time and place and for a particular purpose. The absolute truth is beyond words. It's experiential, it's happening in the moment. And relative truth adapts and changes to the times. They say in the Dharma that the Buddha spoke in 84,000 tongues. That's figurative speech. And what it means is simply that the Buddhist teachings adapt themselves to every possible circumstance. And there are 84,000 of them. 84,000, every culture, many cultures, have a number that means just big. In Chinese, it's wan, which literally means 10,000. So they say the famous statement that a journey of 10,000 li is begun with but a single step. 10,000 is just figurative. It means the word wan, means a lot. In Indian culture, it was 84,000, a lot. There were a lot of different teachings, all adapted to the different time and place. And this is the idea of relative truth. So Traleg Rinpoche, I'll just tell you a story that I've told before. Some of you may have heard it. When I first met Trungpa Rinpoche, he was very much communicating the essence of meditation practice to us very directly, purely experiential, beyond words. And one day, this was back in 1970 at what's now called Karmi Choling. Back then it was called Tail of the Tiger. There's a story there, but we won't go into it. And one day, a couple of fellows came down from the Canadian Film Board. And all of us were hippies in those days, and these guys had long hair and bell-bottom pants and beards. And one of them was carrying a shoulder-mounted camera, and the other a tape deck hanging from his shoulder. And they got Rinpoche out on the front lawn, and the fellow with the camera was filming, and the fellow with the tape deck went up and put a microphone in front of Trungpa Rinpoche's face and was asking questions. And the one that struck me so much was, he asked Rinpoche, he said, Trungpa Rinpoche, as a Buddhist, what do you believe in? And Trungpa Rinpoche said, as a Buddhist, I don't believe in anything. And this is really talking about the primacy of absolute truth, that all words that can be formulated into beliefs are just usefully true at particular times and places and are untrue at other particular times and places, in other circumstances and for other people. So that's what he said then. Now, Traleg Rinpoche starts out by talking about how necessary it is for us to develop Buddhist beliefs. He says, before we decide how we are going to assimilate Buddhism into Western culture, we must first understand the meaning of what the uniquely Buddhist concepts are trying to convey. This is the core of what they're trying to convey. And how that's communicated varies from one teacher to the other. Trungpa Rinpoche communicated it very, very powerfully to his students and very immediately. He says it is important to realize that we need to make use of certain Buddhist concepts in order to make sense of meditation practice. The understanding of meditation practice, you could reverse that, illuminates the concepts that are used to describe it. According to Trungpa Rinpoche, we need to believe, according to Traleg, we need to believe that there is liberation, that ignorance is the cause of samsaric bondage, and that the conflicting emotions of the mind restrict our ability to realize our goal. This is approaching it from the point of view of he's talking to people who are totally new, who are totally ignorant, who need to be convinced that they should step on this path. And that's what the Buddhist teachings are doing at this stage of the student's progress. Later, or perhaps earlier, depending on the teacher, the student needn't rely so much on these conceptual teachings, because they've begun to experience the teachings beyond words. At that point, words change their function. Instead of being educational, they become confirmations of understandings that have developed in the student as they have practiced, as they have studied, and as they have communicated with a teacher. Then words become confirmation of your understanding and help you relax and solidify. So Trungpa Rinpoche felt that people just shouldn't blindly accept beliefs, but they needed to test them. In fact, he said that the people who make the best Buddhists are people who are very cynical. Cynics make the best Buddhists, he said, because they've gotten to the bottom of the barrel of belief and found it wanting. Later, as they progress along the path, they have to give up cynicism itself. He said cynicism eventually is a knife that cuts itself because it becomes another stance. Traleg Rinpoche agrees that people can be dogmatic, opinionated, fundamentalist, but he asserts that we do need a philosophical orientation so that we know what we are trying to achieve. And we need to understand our personal predicament, our existential condition, not to mention the potential psychological and spiritual conflicts that we may encounter along the way. Meditation, in fact, makes all this much clearer. He says, therefore, while it is sometimes said that we should learn to dispense with our beliefs at a later point on the Buddhist path, we cannot approach spiritual practices without having any viewpoints or making use of our belief systems. And this is true for people who are coming naively to the Buddhist path. Then you get convinced by the Four Noble Truths, by the 3 marks of existence, by these basic teachings that this is a teaching and a discipline that will help you and bring truth to your life. But as soon as you begin to connect fundamentally, really, with meditation experience and be able to bring it into your daily life, then beliefs go out the window. They're a crutch you no longer need, and which actually can impede progress. So he says, it is true that the Buddhist approach to realizing ultimate truth and discovering the sacredness of spiritual reality can only be attained through adopting the Buddhist view and path. And what does he mean by the Buddhist view and path? When you tread the path, when you become a practitioner and a Buddhist, you employ what are called the three wheels of learning. These are meditation, contemplation, and study. One needs study because it points you in a direction and it shows you a vista. But that study, whatever it is pure concept, and it needs to be grounded or confirmed by your experience, which comes from meditation. The meditation on the cushion and meditation in action as you get up and start walking through the days of your life. And as you bring these two together, the study, which gives you the view, and the meditation practice, that's called contemplation, and that's the third wheel. And you begin to see how the words and the experience relate to each other. Then he says, so developing the correct view comes before starting meditation practice in Buddhism. Trungpa Rinpoche would have disagreed with this. He would have disagreed because he was giving people the experience of the correct view before he even gave them the view, before he gave them the words to put to it. The correct view is the word in Sanskrit is drishti, is also called the noble view, and the incorrect view is called the ignoble view. Ultimately, you have to give up all views on this path. There was a great 2nd century AD Buddhist named Nagarjuna. He founded the Madhyamaka, or Middle Way school of Buddhism, the school that rationalized and explained the doctrine of Shunyata. Nagarjuna is sometimes called the second Buddha. And he said that the path consists of giving up all drishti, all views, all beliefs. And those who cling to that as a belief, a drishti, a view, those, the victors, the jinas, have pronounced incurable. Not even that. You have to come into the realm of experience. There are so many sayings. There are some Zen sayings, for instance, in the end, there is no Buddha, there is no Dharma, there is nothing profound. That is a statement about giving up view because one has found the true experience and is living it. So he talks about the correct view and how correct views can lead us to liberation. And this is true. I mean, you get an interest in Buddhism and it begins to sound like, as you hear about it, that it makes sense to you. And so it leads you onto the Buddhist path. This is the gradual path, you might say, as opposed to the sudden path, which Trungpa Rinpoche was an advocate of and taught. He taught both. But the gradual path has to do with introducing students to the ideas, and they like them, the ideas, and begin to practice. And then they begin to accumulate genuine experience, which transcends words. So this chapter, you can hear it, presents a lot of conflicts. He says, we should not conclude that our job is to get rid of all views. This is in the beginning again. And I put in, until we reach the end of the path, which idea is based on, quote, the legitimate premise that Buddhist teachings emphatically identify the need to develop a non-conceptual wisdom mind, in order to attain liberation, enlightenment. Ultimately, what all these concepts, these views, these beliefs are leading us to is non-conceptual wisdom mind, giving up all those beliefs and coming into pure, direct experience of reality. And then, but he keeps emphasizing that at least at the very beginning stages of the path, or even the middle, maybe even right up to the end, we do need conceptual beliefs. We do need conceptual systems to push us forward, to open our minds to new possibilities, new ways of seeing things. That's what these do, these beliefs. I mean, one of the very first and most fundamental of all Buddhist doctrines is the doctrine of anatma, no self. What a radical idea. Most people, when they hear that for the first time, they've never heard such a thing before. Because we all believe I. And this doctrine says, I is a myth. I does not exist. So what it does is it opens up our mind to a new possibility. Then it's up to us to go and find out what that truly means experientially. And the way we do that is through study, meditation practice, and contemplation, where we bring our experience and the words together. He says, these conceptual categories, all these ideas, the Four Noble Truths, the 3 marks of existence, the 6 realms, the 12 nidanas, all of that, the Eightfold Path. These conceptual categories won't necessarily produce the liberated state, but they will point us in the right direction. And then, through working with our minds in meditation practice, and also by working with the lineage through teachers, we can begin to actually be what these words are attempting to describe. And words can only approximate the reality. He says some meditative experiences can appear legitimate, but are in fact leading us in the wrong direction. There's a whole class of meditations that have to do with fixing your mind totally one-pointedly on an object so powerfully that they become trance states. These are called the dhyanas in Sanskrit, the jhanas in Pali. And there are 8 of them ascending in order, becoming subtler and subtler. The last 4 are completely abstract. One meditates on things like not this, not that, and pure consciousness, and one meditates on space. That's a good one. And they say that if you do these things are very dangerous. You can get stuck in them. You can get stuck in what amount to trance states, the dhyanas. And so this is an example of how the wrong instruction can lead you into a practice that becomes a dead end. He says, in order to cultivate transcendental knowledge, that's knowledge beyond logic, beyond this and that, immediate experience in the present moment, we need first to hear and study the teachings, then to contemplate their deeper meaning, and finally to follow up by meditating on their inner mental and spiritual significance. And we need to have contact with a teacher who can bring these completely alive for us. Conceptual understanding and transcendental knowledge, prajna, which is sort of one of the first things we begin to understand. As we come into meditation practice, we begin to develop this transcendent or transcendental knowledge, which is called prajna in Sanskrit, which really has to do with seeing things very directly. And still, we are conceptualizing that a little bit. We're turning it into a thing. Oh yes, now I can see this very directly. And so we put a name on it, prajna. ultimately, that morphs into wisdom. And wisdom is simply saying there is nothing to possess, no knowledge, no wisdom to possess. It's here everywhere. It pervades all experience. And that's called jnana, which is pure knowing. Then he talks about the Mahamudra tradition and says that we need in this tradition to acquire a correct conceptual understanding of emptiness, or the nature of mind, which is what emptiness is one way of putting it. Emptiness is shunyata. Shunya means empty. Ta is a nominative, turns it into a noun. So it's emptiness, voidness. What's it void of? It's void of belief. Belief in anything. And especially, it's void of belief in I and other. We tend to believe that I exist and so do you. And we have this relationship. And if the relationship is pleasant, then we want to draw that other, you, to me. And if it's unpleasant, we want to push you away. And if it's neither, we're indifferent. These are the three poisons. Aggression, pushing something away, passion, pulling it towards you, and indifference, leaving it the same distance because you don't care. And they all depend on belief. Belief that I exist, that that other exists, and that there is a relationship between them. So it's very essential at some stage on the path to begin to become familiar with the idea that these are false, these assertions of I and other and the relationship between them, and that what is true is an open dimension in which I and other don't exist, in which everything is arising and passing away in the moment and has no ongoing being, but is a constant appearance, just like these words, as they appear to your ears and are gone. Where did they go? Nobody knows. Where did this gesture go? It just disappeared into space. Nowhere. So the correct view, which we are always being taught, is provisional. It's a conceptual understanding. It helps us. It's a crutch. It helps us proceed along the path and begin to see things in a new and different way. It suggests that we've been lost in gross errors, and that there are other more accurate ways of seeing things. Ch1 Lodro Taye, great teacher in the 19th century, says, one who meditates without the view is like a blind man wandering the plains. It's just, you're blind, you're just listening to all the old stories that you've heard all your life. There is no reference point for where the true path is, waking up from these concepts. The one who does not meditate but merely holds the view, who just thinks about philosophy, is like a rich man tethered by stinginess. He is unable to bring appropriate fruition to himself and others. That means person who just becomes like a professional philosopher, a Buddhist philosopher. Joining view and meditation is the holy tradition. What that means is bringing your experience and the words together. And when you do, they both dissolve. The experience doesn't become some new thing that you can conceptualize, and the words don't become labels that you put on it. You begin to move into this formless void, shunya, ta, of pure experience, the constant arising of vivid phenomena and passing away. So the Buddhist teachings have four characteristics, according to the Mahayana Uttar Tantra, 5th century, by a famous teacher named Maitreya. One is they lead sentient beings to enlightenment, waking up from the dreams that have played in our minds from time immemorial. Two, The words that express the meaning of the Buddhist teachings are devoid of any linguistic imperfections. Well, that's what they say. The function of the Buddhist teachings is to eliminate all mental afflictions and open us up to experience. And their purpose is the pacification of the suffering of sentient beings. These are the 4 points that he makes. Any teaching that fails to meet these requirements would be considered the cause of wrong views in people. And then he talks about the two collections, the two main collections of Buddhist teachings in Tibet. And that this is the same kind of division that occurred in other countries as well, between the collections of the words of the Buddha on the one hand and commentaries on the other. The words of the Buddha were called the Kanjur, and many, many volumes. I think it's 103 volumes of texts, because the Buddha spoke in 84,000 tongues, whatever was necessary for his audience to hear. And the Tenjur is the commentarial literature. Great teachers and other people who came after the Buddha and explained his teachings or elaborated on them. And these teachings are also called in the Tenjur, they're called in Sanskrit, it's Upadesha. Upadesha means oral instructions. You can get Upadesha from a teacher today. In Tibetan, it's called Manak. And these are some of the most powerful teachings a student can receive because they are created on the spot for the student. And sometimes they're written down and they're in the Tenjur. And finally, in addition, there are what are called terma. And terma are the revealed treasures, which we've spoken of before, left by teachers centuries ago because they knew that those teachings were inappropriate for the people of their time and would be discovered in the future, hundreds of years hence, perhaps, and by whom, and revealed. And there are many, many terma. And one of the most available for us is a terma that Trungpa Rinpoche received called the Sadhana of Mahamudra, which we chant once a month. So the Buddhist canon is enormous, spans many subjects. And I once asked Trungpa Rinpoche about how the teachings are generated. You see, they're constantly changing as they adapt to different people in different times and different places. And I said, I had the feeling, I had sort of got the impression, I said, do you think it's kind of like great teachers sit around and one of them says to the others, you know, I've come up with a new way of putting it. What do you think of this? And gives them a new way of putting it. And they all listen and think about it. They, oh, yeah, that's pretty good, you know, or, you know, maybe you could fine tune it this way. There's constant evolution. There is no canon in Buddhism. There is no holy writ. There is no equivalent of the Bible or the Quran. The Buddhist teachings are constantly changing and adapting to the time and the place. So when you get into Tantra, especially the higher reaches of Tantra, and Mahamudra, which we're going to be studying soon, is one of those, you will be dealing a lot with Upadesha. Upadesha are the oral teachings, transmissions of any enlightened, wise teacher. Finally, I'm just going to close with these closing remarks. He said that these are some things that were in this chapter that I thought were lovely. First of all knowledge and learning must be joined with meditation. Otherwise, it will be of very little importance. And the Buddha said that the teachings are like a raft for crossing a river, and that when we reach the other shore, we will leave the raft behind. And then I wrote down, or the Zen, or the finger, you know, the Zen story of the finger pointing to the moon, which we saw Bruce Lee recap. That's an old story. Don't look at the finger or you will miss all the heavenly glory. So the raft and the finger are necessary initially. You need to get pointed. And then you look up at the moon, because they provide the spiritual vehicle that we desperately need. Without them, we will drown in the turbulent and murky waters of samsara. It is only once the content and the significance of the teachings have been thoroughly assimilated into our being, so that the external and the internal teachings have intermingled, that we can let go of our conceptual understanding. When there is no separation between the teachings and ourselves, we no longer have any need for the conceptual tools that the Buddhist teachings provide. We no longer need that finger pointing to the moon. Yeah. In the end, there is no Buddha, no Dharma, there is nothing profound. That slogan. So until we reach enlightenment, it is definitely necessary to rely on the useful conceptual tools that are provided in these teachings. But these aren't religious, rigid beliefs. We don't become true believers. That's anathema to Buddhism, to become a true believer. It cripples you, and it makes you into a pest. These conceptual tools are indispensable, like the finger pointing to the moon. We need them, and then we let them go or give them to others. And then he says, when the teachings are fully understood, they do not simply remain on a conceptual level, but become converted into deep spiritual realization, which goes beyond concept. And his concepts are unnecessary. So I'll stop there and turn this over to Michael.
Okay. So with this, we're going to move back to the previous chapter. The title of that chapter altogether is What is Mahamudra? So that's really the question that we're asking, or being asked to consider at least. In my experience, the entire path of practicing Mahamudra is asking that question over and over again. And before I complicate things, or although hopefully I won't, let me just say that the essence of Mahamudra is simplicity, and that the practice that we do here every morning and evening, which follows exactly the instruction that Trungpa Rinpoche gave his students, really is infused with the view of Mahamudra. So as always, we begin by taking a good posture. So we could do that right now. But the point of taking a good posture is that it's easier to recognize awareness in stillness. But that doesn't mean that stillness creates awareness. Awareness is there all the time. The question is, do we recognize that? So we take a good posture just to make it easier for ourselves to begin to recognize awareness. But once we do that, we let go completely. Is any effort to create something, any effort to stop something, obscures our experience. And so as Traleg Rinpoche says, that with the path of self-liberation, that self-liberation is achieved through recognizing our innate state of being, or the nature of mind, and that we simply enter into our own spiritual being or rest in our own natural state. So that's what we're asked to do. Take a good posture, take a moment to settle, and then you can take a deep breath. And as we breathe out, relax completely with no further effort at all. It's simply this, simply now. So the difficulty for us is we begin thinking we should be experiencing something different. we engage with thoughts and become distracted. But when we're able to just simply rest in present awareness, that's really what Mahamudra is about. So, again, the question in this chapter, we're reading the last part of chapter 1. What is Mahamudra? And what he does in the rest of this chapter is first present some basic ideas that will be explored further in the rest of the book, beginning with ground Mahamudra, and then explains path Mahamudra in terms of tranquility and insight, or what we usually call shamatha and vipassana, and then describes fruition Mahamudra, which really involves coming back to the ground, what we already have, what we already are, but with a full recognition, a full identification, in our experience with that. So to begin with, ground Mahamudra begins by saying the Mahamudra view is based on the underlying metaphysical concept of the nature of mind. So being me, of course, I had to look up exactly what metaphysical means. And it's basically a philosophy that pertains to the fundamental nature of reality. So what we're talking about is things as they are, including ourselves, we as we are. And then as a ground, we're talking about the basis, the starting point, which is the nature of mind, the essence of mind, what we fundamentally are. When we're able to relax completely, when we're able to let go, that's what we touch in with. That's what we experience. That's what we recognize. Fundamental awareness, completely open, vivid, vibrant awareness. And he says that the ground has been pure right from the beginning because it does not arise from any causes. So when we touch in with the sense of awareness, the underlying current that runs through all of our experiences, we can't find an origin. There's no starting point. There's no place that it comes from. It doesn't have a cause. It doesn't come from anything. And because it doesn't come from anything, or some traditions talk about it as being self-arising, it doesn't have any bias. It doesn't have any, it doesn't need any particular reference point. And a lot of the different terms that are used in different texts to describe this is the natural state, uncontrived, unfabricated, which is why we don't need to create anything. Teachings, a lot of times teachers just say we don't need to do that. But going even further, our very attempt to do that is what obscures, because it keeps us caught up in conceptual mind. It's defeated at the start to think that we can create non-conceptuality through some kind of concept. He says that this nature of mind, this essence of mind, is beyond the three times. It's not bound by past, present, or future. And this relates directly to the notion of continuity, which is one translation of the word tantra, the continuity of awareness that has no beginning, has no end, not bound by past, present, or future in its essence. And he says we can't attribute any type of action to it. We can't say it comes into being. We can't say it goes out of existence. And he says we can't speak about it using our normal reifying concepts of existence or non-existence, permanence or impermanence, good or evil, that is devoid of notions of samsara, nirvana, or spiritual path. So we have to, in order to experience ground Mahamudra, we need to let go of concepts of any kind and just relax into experience. So even though we can't speak about it using our normal reifying concepts, we're going to continue doing the best that we can, trying to describe something about what it means. But basically, the nature of mind, which is the Mahamudra, what he says the Mahamudra view is based on, is mind before concept, and therefore can't be captured by concept. The best we have are words that, as John was saying, point to, like a sign. In some cases, in a more, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I always think of it almost like a diving board, that the concept is like a starting point, but then we have to let go completely. see a sign and think that we're already at our location, we've made a mistake. So concepts can be useful, but they can also be binding. And being clear in our experience, what we're experiencing is an important aspect of Mahamudra. He says that this essence of mind, basic nature of mind, is the source from which all samsaric and nirvanic experiences arise, but it's not subject itself to causes and conditions. It can't be affirmed. In other words, we can't say it is this, and it can't be negated. We can't say that it's that. And it's called ground Mahamudra because it is the essential condition in which we find ourselves. And with this, we're actually presented next with one of the Upadeshas, a song of Mahamudra by Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Taye. So it begins with, as for ground Mahamudra, there are both things as they are and the way of confusion. And this is actually very similar to what we studied before in the chapter on Samantabhadra in particular. Basically the all ground, the all basis, the basic completely reference point-free, concept-free nature of mind, just rigpa, awake mind, is free of any concept. What happens is we then either recognize the awareness, we recognize the appearances of awareness, we recognize the appearances of rigpa, we recognize the appearances of ordinary mind, which is a term more often associated with Mahamudra, or we don't. So as for ground Mahamudra, there are both things as they are and the way of confusion. When we recognize, we're with things as they are. When we fail to recognize fundamental awareness and recognize appearances as a display of awareness, then that's the way of confusion. The Upadesha then goes on to say it does not incline toward either samsara or nirvana, and is free from the extremes of exaggeration and denigration. In other contexts, and I think this is one as well, the extreme of exaggeration is referring to, in particular, to eternalism, taking things as real, and all of the things that come after that. That once we assume something is real, then we attribute all kinds of judgments and biases and ideas about it. And the extreme of denigration is the extreme of nihilism, saying that nothing matters, nothing is, and imagining, becoming caught up in a kind of confused nothingness. So basically, the essence of mind, the nature of mind, ground Mahamudra, is free of both extremes. Both the extremes of saying things are real, which is most often what we get caught up in, but also saying that things aren't real either. Not produced by causes, not changed by conditions. It is not spoiled by confusion, nor exalted by realization. So what's saying here is that the ground Mahamudra, the essence of mind, the nature of mind, is unchanging in the sense that it is not in any way affected by confusion. It's not because it's not produced by causes. It's not exalted by realization. It grows neither more nor less. Our recognition of it grows more or less, but in itself it doesn't. And it doesn't know either confusion or liberation. Those are all concepts, experiences that arise once we fail to recognize the true nature of our mind. So, he says ground Mahamudra is an open state of being that's identical to our authentic condition. It is the ground from which all experiences arise. That it's totally open, undifferentiated. And as soon as we speak about this condition as being this or that, inclining toward nirvana or samsara, we introduce a dualism that doesn't exist in reality. So again, it's mind free of concept, free of being bound by concept, mind free of being bound by labels or biases of any kind. He says it's present in both ordinary sentient beings as well as enlightened beings, but the difference is that enlightened beings have recognized that their authentic condition, true nature, while ordinary beings have not. And that we have to, when we contemplate our natural state of being, we have to put to rest mental fabrications of any kind, any conceivable kind. That the point of is not to develop ideas, but to learn to rest in the natural state of being through Mahamudra practice, which he will present later. The interesting statement that all concepts are based on exclusion. This comes out of the Abhidharma and Pramana traditions, but the basic idea is that fundamentally we develop concepts through exclusion. It's if you watch a young child learning to speak, first they'll develop a concept of whatever, bird as opposed to dog, by excluding everything that isn't bird. And then within that, at first everything's a bird. And then they learn there are certain kinds of birds. So this is a constant process of excluding, not this, not this, not this. It's what we're going through right now, trying to understand something about Mahamudra. Not this, not this, not this. And at a certain point, we just need to let go of the struggle. Because otherwise we end up with fabricated ideas rather than experiences. And we end up seeing our ideas of things rather than the actual thing. And the thrust of Mahamudra meditation is to allow our mind to be open so we can ease into a more natural state of perceiving and being. As he says, we have to be careful about getting overly fixated on any description of things, of the qualities of our original state of being. He then quotes Gotsangpa as saying we need three things to stay with the correct view. The first, we need a decisive understanding of our original being. And this is what we experience, work with, develop through Mahamudra meditation. The second is a non-bias towards samsara and nirvana, because our meditation will be affected by our hopes and fears in regard to samsara and nirvana, any sense of good or bad, however we might conceive of that. So we have to develop a sense of non-bias so that we can simply be open with our experience, whatever it is, without hope and fear. And the third is conviction, which I think reflects real change of allegiance, or the complete identification with the natural state of being, open mind, awareness, and complete confidence in that. He says Mahamudra uses the expression ordinary mind, or tamalgye shepa, to describe the nature of the mind that we already have. In other words, it's the mind that's here now. It's not, we don't need to look elsewhere. We don't need to create anything. And in fact, the attempt to create something obscures, creates struggle rather than clarity. That we gain insight into the nature of mind by gaining insight into this ordinary mind, the mind we have right now. If we avoid the judgment of our thoughts, we'll be able to attain the luminous bliss of the nature of the mind. And then he quotes Jamgon Kongtrul again, like the center of a cloudless sky, this self-luminous mind is impossible to express. It is wisdom of non-thought beyond analogy, naked, ordinary mind. So with this, we begin talking about Path Mahamudra, and explains that ground Mahamudra is referred to as the basis of purification, that what happens is because we don't recognize our true nature to begin with, we get lost in confusion. We mistake appearances of Rigpa or the appearances of awareness as something other, and become lost in confusion and lost in ignorance. And because of this, our true nature becomes obscured by what are called adventitious stains. And the adventitious means that they're not fundamental to who we are. They're like a cover on top of who we are, you could say. And there's nothing innate or permanent about confusion, and nothing innate or permanent about the kleshas or anything else that we experience. They're all temporary. And that we, by recognizing our true nature, we can clarify this and come to understand this. so that the objects of purification are not innate. But what is innate, what is true, is as he says, the luminous bliss of the inherent nature of mind. And he said, and in the end, ground and fruition are the same. With the stains are purified, there's nothing standing in the way. We remove the barriers, we remove the veils that obscure the luminous, aware nature of mind. So in terms of Path Mahamudra, there are two approaches that actually work together. The first is he calls tranquility meditation, what most teachers call Mahamudra Shamatha. And he makes an important distinction here. He says that tranquility meditation is used to still the mind. So by still the mind, meaning that we're letting go or allowing thoughts to settle, allowing ourselves to simply be. But it's not a question of taming the mind, as in other Buddhist traditions, and particularly the Hinayana practices. That we're actually open to everything. We're not trying to remove anything. We're trying to just simply see everything that's there. And so, as he says, the mind is allowed to subside naturally of its own accord. And that mindfulness is present, but without artifice or contrivance. So with Mahamudra Shamatha, or tranquility meditation, a lot of the instruction is sometimes a lot of don'ts. Don't speculate. Don't think about thoughts of the past. Don't think about thoughts of the future. But then it's to let go, to relax, to rest naturally. And all we do is, when we recognize that we are caught up in thoughts about past, present, or future, is simply recognize that, see it, and then rest in awareness. We're not trying to stop or tame anything. That, as he says, thoughts themselves are allowed to settle of their own accord. There's no need to force them into submission. Ultimately, the idea is that with Mahamudra Shamatha, or tranquility meditation, what we're trying to do is actually rest in the nature of mind. That I attended teachings once two different teachings where a teacher was asked, what's the difference between ordinary shamatha and Mahamudra Shamatha, or tranquility meditation? And one person answered, well, with Mahamudra Shamatha, we actually follow the instructions. And what that really means is that we just simply rest in simplicity. That's really what the instruction is. We just be in our experience, not doing anything, but just being on our experience, fully awake and aware. The other answer was interesting too. The other answer, different time, was that in Mahamudra Shamatha, in ordinary shamatha, there's an object of meditation that we focus on, the breath, the candle, object, whatever it might be. That if in Mahamudra Shamatha, if there's an object, if we can call it that, which is, it's the nature of mind, it's the essence of mind, which is awareness. So essentially saying the same thing. What insight meditation, or Mahamudra Vipassana, involves, as he says, an intimate and methodical examination of what the mind is. That we ask questions such as, what is the mind? What is a thought? What is the nature of thought? What's important here is that with this, that it's Mahamudra Vipassana, or insight meditation, as he describes it, is based completely on remaining in present experience. That, in other words, Mahamudra Shamatha, or tranquility meditation, and simply looking at our experience and remaining in our experience. So actually, it's a question, it's really experiencing. That each one of these questions is just a pointer that we then look into our experience with. What is mine? And not trying to answer that conceptually, but what are we actually experiencing in the moment? It's mind looking directly at mind in the moment. What is a thought? Not the content. That's what we ordinarily do. But what is it in the moment? What is the experience of that? What is the nature of thought? And what happens is with persistent analysis of this type, to quote Traleg Rinpoche, reveals the mind is not an entity or a substance, that it's empty. And he says, this is a supreme realization. And the way that this is practiced, traditionally is short sessions repeated often, and that we look again and again at the nature of mind. He quotes Savaripa as saying, in the process of searching for all that manifests as mind and matter, there's nothing to be seen, nothing to be found, nor is there any seeker. And so very often the instruction in Mahamudra is simply to rest in the seeing of non-seeing, the not finding, but being able to rest in just that experience right in the moment. And he says, through analyzing every experience, we come to realize that even our own confused thoughts are of the same nature, have the same nature as the nature of mind itself. And this is done through, again, first settling with tranquility meditation, Mahamudra Shamatha, simply settling completely into the simplicity of present experience, without trying to create anything, stop anything, just as we do every morning. And then with insight meditation, or Mahamudra Vipassana, it is an analytic approach. We ask ourselves certain questions, and not looking for conceptual answers, but answers right in the experience that we're having. What can we actually see? What do we actually experience? And when the chapter in the book will describe, the chapters in the book that we'll come to later will describe these practices in more detail. But basically with Mahamudra Vipassana or insight practice, look at all kinds of different things. We look at the mind itself, we look at the kleshas, look at perceptions, look at the mind in stillness and movement. We look at who is looking, who's the looker, and what's looked at, and realize their inseparability. Look at thoughts and the nature of thoughts. So basically, as he says, in Insight Mahamudra or Mahamudra Vipassana, everything we experience is regarded as having the potential to reveal our true nature. And for this reason, among other things, disturbing emotions are not something to abandon, which is, again, what we do in the Hinayana practices. We simply need to develop an understanding of their nature. We learn how to use thoughts to attain a meditative state. And with this, then comes to fruition Mahamudra, which culminates in the 4 yogas of Mahamudra, which are one-pointedness, first one. The second one he terms non-conceptuality, but in other texts you'll see it as either simplicity or freedom from the elaborations. He calls one flavor what many teachers call one taste, but again, same idea. And the last of the 4 yogas of Mahamudra is non-meditation. And he quotes a text by Ch1 and then comments on it in terms of these 4 yogas, which again, we'll read about later in the book. The line from Ch1 is first, with the first yoga of one-pointedness, to rest in tranquility is the stage of one-pointedness. And Traleg Rinpoche says, the yoga of one-pointedness essentially denotes recognizing the nature of mind. So ultimately, that's what, in particular, the tranquility meditation or Mahamudra Shamatha is about, recognizing the nature of mind and being able to stay in that, be in that. We are that. We just don't know that. So the yoga of one-pointedness essentially denotes recognizing the nature of mind. He says one has attained this stage with the first taste of luminous bliss while in deep, undisturbed meditative equipoise. And then the fruition is our ability to maintain meditative luminosity. So this refers to the luminous quality of mind, and that's what's recognized in the first yoga. Then with the second yoga, Ch1 says, to terminate confused thoughts is the stage of non-conceptuality. And Traleg Rinpoche says, the yoga of non-conceptuality is attained by realizing that the mind has no root and is devoid of enduring substance. No root means no cause, no It's not in any one place, and it's all of those things. That mind itself, and as the more we realize that, then we realize that everything that occurs in mind must be empty, because mind itself is empty. Mind itself and all that occurs in mind is empty, including all thoughts. So that's the fruition of the second yoga, non-conceptuality. The third, one flavor or one taste. Ch1 says to transcend the duality of accepting and rejecting is the stage of one flavor. And Traleg Rinpoche says the yoga of one flavor refers to the experience of non-duality. Divisions between mind and external world, subject and object, and all other dualistic notions, samsara and nirvana, are equalized. So this is a state where, that in one sense is beyond all reference point, because we've given up all of the conceptual fabrications and conceptual biases that, and are able to recognize the emptiness of all things. And then finally, with non-meditation, Ch1 says to perfect experiences is the stage of non-meditation. And Traleg Rinpoche says this is ultimate genuine fruition. It means that meditation has become the natural state to be in. This is what Trungpa Rinpoche used to call 24-hour awareness. It's inseparable from the ground Mahamudra. So non-meditation means that the meditative state is how we are. And we are then, again, completely identified with, switched allegiance to the awake nature of mind. Following that, he gives a very brief thing, makes some brief statements as an overview for what the rest of the book will be. But it's helpful to keep these things in mind. So the next 5 chapters, including the one that we began with tonight, relate to developing correct view. And what he says is about these chapters is they don't present the self-liberation approach that we're talking about with Mahamudra, but rather self-transformation, but that this is complementary to self-liberation. It doesn't hinder anything, and in fact helps us. And then chapter 7 through 11 follow the outline of ground, path, and fruition Mahamudra that we've been talking about. And he talks about, again, ground Mahamudra as simply being our Buddha nature. And that the path is involving, again, tranquility and insight meditation, or shamatha and vipassana. And he says the fruition is the ultimate realization of the nature of mind as having 3 qualities. It is empty, it is luminous, and it's the experience of bliss. Empty, luminous, and the experience of bliss. And he concludes the chapter by saying, when the emptiness of physical and mental phenomena, or all dharmas, is directly experienced as a subjective reality, and the mind is stable and able to maintain awareness, the luminous quality of mind gives rise to a sense of well-being that transcends both happiness and unhappiness. This is the experience of all-pervasive bliss, the goal of Mahamudra. When we no longer fixate on our thoughts and emotions, but let them arise without interference and without hope and fear, our minds will become blissfully clear. So with that, that's what I came to say. And we could have some discussion.
All right, can you help us see people who have questions? Thanks.
Actually, I have a comment
Go ahead.
that I thought, John, that chapter you let off with would actually be a great introduction to people who are just being exposed to this for the first time.
I think Bruce Lee's movie might be a great introduction, or at least that one part.
That too. But really, I thought that was just such a great overview, included some of the history of Buddhism and its traveling to different countries and how it changed and the presentation. Anyway, That's what I thought. And I guess I did have one more question I'll sneak in here quickly. When you talk about the different bodies of teachings, is this kind of like the Torah and the Talmud?
I don't know. What do you think, Dan? You don't know either.
Oh, here I am. I'm think I don't have a question, but I feel like it's so profound that we are making things so much harder than they need to be. Right? I mean, all these things that we're implementing to obtain bliss or peace, or we're making it harder than it needs to be. Am I seeing that correctly? I mean, I got a little epiphany here, you know. It's like, just let it be, girl, just let it be.
You got it.
Let him settle. Let's just stop shaking up the globe and just let it settle.
That's
That's it.
You know,
That's it.
like the snow globe, right? The snow globe, just let it go. So anyway, that's what I got out of it. I just think I probably make things harder than they need to be.
I think we all do, or at least speaking for myself.
That's a description of samsara. Making things
I
harder
agree.
than they need to be.
Yeah.
Robert.
Thanks. This is fascinating. I'm taking lots of notes. What an exciting journey. So my question was about the difference between Buddhism and nihilism. And it seems like a very simple question, and I understand it intuitively. But often we hear in Buddhism that we talk about, no light, no dark, no rich, a series of no's, and those no's accumulate and ask, what is left? And I'm not sure how to articulate it, but I know you mentioned that Buddhism is not nihilism, and obviously that's true. But if you could talk a little bit more about the distinction between the two, how Buddhism doesn't, when you're left with nothingness, or you're drawing away from suffering and form, that there is still something left, that ultimate truth. And if you could articulate that a little more, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Well, it goes back to Nagarjuna, who said, don't hold to any beliefs. And nihilism is another belief. It's the belief that nothing exists. And it's in contrast to eternalism, which says that there are things, at least some things, which exist forever. And what Buddhism says is the middle way, meaning it's neither of those. It's between that, it's this. And it doesn't exist forever, and it doesn't not exist. It's what it is. As they say in Sanskrit, ta ta ta, which means as it is. So, yeah.
Nihilism is like a fixed view. It would be like, what John was saying about using words as labels as relative truth, the table. But if you go to a different country, I don't know what they call a table in Russian or Japanese, but it wouldn't sound like table at all. And if we would just say, well, then there's nothing at all, that's ridiculous. We know what tables are. But at the same time, it's a relative truth that's useful in certain contexts and not others. And nihilism is it's a viewpoint, and oftentimes used really as a defense, I think, by people. Nothing matters. So I was actually looking for something else and stumbled across a quote from Dzigar Kongpo Rinpoche, where he said something like, emptiness without compassion is merely conceptual negation. So it's not a real understanding of emptiness.
Buddhism is basically saying, don't hold to any philosophy, ultimately. Maybe in the beginning, it'll help you a little bit on the path, maybe. But meditation is all about your experience, your pure experience. And more, we let go of the conceptual labels and understandings and interpretations of our experience, and we experience it, and we understand much more deeply, because any conceptual designation is going to be very relatively two-dimensional, limited. That's why Nagarjuna, his whole thrust, he wrote this thing called the Root Verses on the Middle Way, Mula Madhyamaka Karika. And it's famous text, one of the most important texts in all of Buddhism. And in it, he just destroys any conceptual assertion. So, I'll give you examples. He uses arguments. And modern day logicians appreciate the fact that he actually used a lot of modern logic that he just figured out himself. So, for instance, there are these, and then the Tibetans would have these debates. Perhaps you've seen them, where two monks debate between one another, and they stand and they make these gestures where they put their arms out like this, and then they make an assertion or they make a contradiction. These debates, they were formal events. And there were lots of debates at the great universities in India. And so Nagarjuna says, for instance, I'm just thinking, the Tirtika, that means the heretic, asserts there is such a thing as cause and effect. And Nagarjuna says, well, he's arguing with it. He says, if you assert that there is such a thing as cause and effect, then you must admit that the effect either comes before the cause, simultaneously with the cause, or after the cause. Those are the three possibilities, right? And the Tirtika, the heretic, says, yes, those are the three possibilities. And the Nagarjuna says, well, it's absurd to say that the effect comes before the cause, because then the cause couldn't have caused it. And if it comes at the same time as the cause, how can you tell which is which? And if it comes after the cause, meaning there's no connection between them, how can you say that the cause produced the effect? So this is a typical Nagarjunian argument. There are many of them. I like the one about, let's see, I'll just stop there. I'll give you more.
We have three people with questions: Miriam, Ed, and Mark.
Okay. You pick up, Barry.
You guys duke it out. No, Miriam, what do you have?
Oh, I just wanted to mention something about nihilism, and I have a graduate student right now doing a dissertation on nihilism, and this was inspired by the growing numbers on social media of nihilistic groups, chat groups, and it's alarmingly common. And I think, like Michael said, it is a defense. The way that we define it in the research is a lack of meaning, not just in everything in life, but a lack of meaning for existence itself. And the reason why it would be more prevalent now, I think, is a good question. But with respect to Buddhist thought, it just seems like when you are actually in the moment of awareness, that in and of itself is so pregnant with meaning, that we don't have to justify meaning, in the experience of presence and awareness. So anyway, yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ed?
How about, Ed?
Yeah, well, Miriam is going to be a hard act to follow. Everyone's been saying such profound things, but I really want to share these two thoughts with you, especially since we were talking about words and how concepts differ. So, Michael, I think I never thought that I'd be able to correct Michael, but I think you said that you imagined that the word for table in Japanese sounds nothing like table. The word for table in Japanese is teburu, which is taken from the English. And the second one was how as we develop, we exclude things from concepts. And I can confirm that that's accurate based on my daughter, who one of the first words she learned was gigi. So everything was a gigi. and we were taking her through the zoo. And when she saw a bird, that was a gigi. She saw a dog, that was a gigi. She saw a giraffe, that was a gigi. So she doesn't use gigi for all those few words now. So sorry.
I'll use a different language next time.
Yeah, maybe Chinese.
Ooh.
Mark,
I I was just I don't even know what the point I was going to make originally. I started getting so involved with that the table thought. I was uh does the table exist? And I know we go through this, but if our lives were speeded up and every second was 1,000 years, would that table exist? We wouldn't even see it. It would be gone. You know, it's just things, it's a lot that we just don't get, but we do get the moment and right, the experience and the undefinable and the exhilaration of the moment, although we can't hold on to it. And the moment, the time span of the moment is indefinable. I think I once heard that it was a 60th of a second, or I'm not sure, you know, but is it really? No, it's not. It's so tiny, constantly moving. And yet we get the pleasure of being alive to experience it. And I forget what the other point I wanted to make. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
actually, there is no moment.
Well, that's right. I agree. There is no moment, yet we experience it, which means, yes, there is a moment, but it's undefinable. And you can't measure it, and you can't hold it, and you wouldn't want to. Anyway, I'm sorry. Did I interject with that? Sorry, Michael.
No.
Okay. Anyway.
We're almost out of time, but maybe there's one more comment or question.
Well, you know, in the Hinayana school, the Hinayana stage of the path, there's the Abhidharma, which is basically a systematic explanation for how reality works. It's the Hinayana stage, the foundational stage of the path. And basically what they say is that we're constantly experiencing atoms of experience. You know, there's the atom, now I look at it, there's my glass. Now we hear it, there's this word. Now you have a sensation of your bottom in the chair. And these are atomistic experiences. They're called dharmas. And they arise they list all the possible dharmas. And there are, I think, you know, depending on the school teachings, there were 78 or 82 or even 100. You know, different schools of Buddhism had different counts. And in fact, there was a guy named Steve Goodman who died recently, I think. Is that right, anybody? And he used to get students together and they put together their own abhidharmas, the list of existent things. And the thing about an abhidharma is that it's momentary. It's a momentary experience. Like right now, I'm seeing the lemon in my glass. It's a momentary experience and now it's gone. Or the sound of this word, or whatever it is as I touch my cheek. These things are momentary experiences. This is what dharmas are. And they arise and pass away. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, each one of these experiences. And they say that the life of a dharma lasts either, there are two explanations that I've heard. One is 1/60th of a second, and a number is, which is the same kind of thing. If you were to stack 60 flower petals and then drive a pin through all of them, the amount of time it takes for the pin to go through one of those flower petals is the life of a dharma, of an experience. This was the Hinayana view, but that the things actually exist for that period of time, that brief instant. Then the Mahayana school came along with the doctrine of shunyata and says, nope, not even that. Nothing exists. It's a constant, it's like television set. It's like just constant pixels appearing and disappearing with no substance to them. Anyhow, we're almost at time, I think. Oh, we are at time. Anybody have anything burning to say? I don't think so. There's nobody with their hand
I
raised.
actually wanted to read something very briefly that related to the part of the talk that you did, John, about belief and experience. It's my favorite quote from the first book we read, The Path of Individual Liberation. The Trungpa Rinpoche says, the reason you may find it very difficult to practice and to put into effect whatever you have learned and studied is not because you're stupid and unable to comprehend. It is not that you are lazy, slow, or pleasure-oriented. None of these reasons apply. The only reason you are not able to relate with the teachings is that you are unable to identify with them as personal experience. If you are able to identify with the teachings as personal experience, your intellect naturally flows out, and your meditative experiences and awareness flow out as well. Energy and joy and practice flow out because there is devotion to the path, which has become an integral part of your existence.
Beautiful, thank you.
Anyway, so we should close.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's my favorite quote in that book.
What pages is that on, Michael?
That's only part. I didn't read all of it because I was aware of time. Here, a little more. In order to create an effective marriage, a couple has to develop love for one another. Similarly, you need to personalize the teachings in order to unite with them and bring them into your system, into your whole being. The teachings are based on personal experience, personally applied to individuals, rather than on theoretical speculation or metaphysics. When you identify with the teachings as personal experience, there is well-being and ultimate security. The teachings are alive and they apply to your they apply to your day-to-day living. That is on page 514. Anyway.
Thanks.
We'll
Great
do our
note to end on.
All right, I'm going to mute us all. And we'll close by reciting a prayer for peace and dedicating the merit generated through our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.